So picture this. You have the wife of a billionaire CEO, right? She steps out of this luxury car.
Hmm.
The cameras are flashing everywhere, but the public, they aren't actually looking at her face. They are zooming in on her Louis Vuitton bag.
Right.
And they're mocking it online. They literally call it poop, which, by the way, is like a real slang term used for that brand in South
That
Korea.
was wild.
And they're just obsessing over the price tag of her shoes. And you have to ask why. Because in these, ultra elite circles, a designer bag isn't just a bag.
Oh, absolutely not. It's a massive political liability.
Right. A liability that can literally destabilize an entire corporate empire. So today on the deep dive, we are opening up this highly detailed, frankly, eye-opening lecture transcript.
Yeah.
It's from April 2026, and it completely dismantles everything we assume about marrying into wealth.
It really does. It forces this total reevaluation of, what power actually looks like. We are looking at a blueprint today that takes the very traditional concept of a housewife and scales it all the way up to, to a national caretaker.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We're going to explore this massive, completely untapped social responsibility of the wives of economic leaders.
Mm-hmm.
We'll look at a very specific, ambitious action plan from our sources called the Zero Suicide Project. And, how this South Korean model is designed to just completely rewire the engine of global corporate philanthropy.
Because the way these marriages work right now, at the absolute apex of society.
Like the families of corporate titans?
Exactly. National leaders, corporate titans, the way it works right now is just deeply flawed. People treat it like a mathematical checklist.
Right. It's super transactional.
It is entirely transactional in its current state. Families at that very top rung of the economic ladder, they often arrange these marriages with highly credentialed individuals.
Right.
So you're looking at someone who perhaps has, multiple advanced degrees, comes from a distinguished lineage, or possesses exceptional physical attractiveness. The checklist is fulfilled, they get married, and the assumption is just
that it'll magically work out.
Exactly. The assumption is that the partnership will naturally thrive because, both individuals are high status.
But the source material, it throws a massive wrench in that assumption. It argues that checking those boxes actually creates the underlying cause of friction in these elite marriages.
Yeah, because the problem is this fundamental gap in environmental understanding.
What do you mean?
Well, the incoming partner, regardless of how many PhDs they have, often lacks the practical knowledge of how to navigate or, serve the public from that specific ultra-elevated position.
Oh, right.
They haven't studied the ecosystem of national-level leadership, and they certainly haven't studied the vast demographic of regular citizens who are essentially, supporting their new lifestyle.
It's almost like they've been hired as the lead architect for this massive skyscraper, right? But their only real qualification is that they know how to pick out incredibly expensive curtains.
That is a perfect analogy.
Like, the building is obviously going to collapse under the weight of society's demands because they don't actually understand the structural engineering of their own social position.
Totally. Let's look at the concept of naisho. That's the Korean term for a spouse's domestic support.
Right, like being a supportive partner.
Exactly. The conventional wisdom is that this role is purely about keeping the domestic sphere peaceful. Managing the household staff, making sure the kids are educated, and providing this quiet retreat for the corporate leader.
Which, sounds logical on the surface, doesn't it? If you are running a conglomerate with 100,000 employees, you don't really want to come home and argue about what's for dinner.
No, you don't. But the lecture completely redefines what naisho has to mean when you're at this extreme altitude of wealth.
Because the stress is different.
Right. The stress a corporate titan faces it's not ordinary stress. They are dealing with crushing macro-level societal issues.
Mm-hmm.
They are navigating labor strikes, economic downturns, international trade wars.
Right.
And that kind of pressure doesn't just evaporate when they walk through their front door. They bring that immense frustration home with them.
And if the spouse's entire operational range is just limited to shopping at luxury department stores or managing the interior design,
they have absolutely nothing to offer in that moment.
they can't relate at all.
Exactly. They cannot act as what the text calls a true sounding board or a conversational partner. If a CEO is agonizing over a decision that will affect thousands of families' livelihoods, a spouse who is disconnected from the realities of the public, they just can't offer meaningful counsel. The
Wow.
communication breaks down because they are living in two completely different realities, and the marriage inevitably starts to fracture because the leader feels isolated at the top, even inside their own home.
And what's fascinating and frankly kind of terrifying for these families is that the public intuitively senses this disconnect. I mean, we mentioned the designer bag earlier.
Right, the poop bag.
Yeah. The text is incredibly blunt about this. The public absolutely resents seeing a leader's wife parading around as just this idle consumer of wealth while an assistant trails behind her carrying her things. They don't see a successful family. They see a parasite on the system.
And the vulnerability here is profound.
Right.
Looking at this strictly through the lens of political mechanics, and just a quick note, we're just following the lecture's sociological logic here, not taking any political sides.
Right, just reporting what the source says.
Exactly. When the elite show off extreme wealth without demonstrating equivalent public service, it generates deep societal anger. The text points out that political opposition groups, and it specifically cites factions aligned with North Korea's Juke ideology as an example, they utilize this public frustration as fuel.
So they literally weaponize the resentment.
They harvest it. When the elite fail to justify their position at the top of the hierarchy through actual service, they provide the exact nutrients that opposition movements need to challenge the establishment.
To try and overturn the whole societal structure.
Exactly.
So by just existing as a wealthy socialite, treating the position like, I don't know, a permanent vacation, they are actively destabilizing their own husband's corporate empire and the very society that makes their wealth possible.
It's a huge blind spot.
Which leads to this incredible pivot in the source material regarding the term samonim. Now, that's a respectful Korean title for a leader's wife.
Right.
The text argues that being a samonim is not a private designation. You aren't just a wife anymore. You are the samonim to the public.
Yeah.
If the public is granting you that immense respect, you owe them a debt.
Your naisho, your support, has to become social support.
Yes, you are stepping out of the private sphere and into the public trust. The moment you marry into that level of influence, you basically forfeit the right to just be a private citizen spending money.
That's the mindset shift right there.
But, you know, vision without a mechanism is just a hallucination. It's one thing to have the mindset shift and say, okay, I need to serve the public to justify my position. But how do these women actually execute that without just getting in the way?
Right, because good intentions aren't enough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The text introduces this concept of becoming a social parent, or sahobumo. If the mindset is serving the public, the execution is treating the public like they are your literal household.
And this framework relies on the traditional concept of salim, which refers to housekeeping or managing a household.
Okay.
The source argues that women are often naturally socialized and suited for this kind of complex, multifaceted management. But when you are dealing with the wives of corporate leaders or the daughters of chaebol,
Those are the massive family-run conglomerates in South Korea, right?
yeah, exactly, the huge economic engines, for them, their home is no longer a physical mansion.
Their home scales up to the borders of the country.
Their home is the nation. The citizens working in these vast chaebol industries are essentially their children in this sociological model.
Wow.
They are tasked with taking all those skills of household management, so nurturing, conflict resolution, resource allocation, long-term planning, and applying them to the macroeconomy.
Okay, let me challenge that for a second. If they're acting as, like, national housekeepers, does that mean they're supposed to be running for political office? Or taking over as CEOs of these conglomerates? Because having someone with no political or corporate experience suddenly try to run the country seems like a recipe for total disaster.
Oh, the blueprint explicitly forbids that.
Oh, it does?
Yes. They should not be trying to run the corporate businesses, and they definitely shouldn't be engaging in electoral politics. The execution strategy is highly specialized and completely insulated from those arenas.
So what do they actually do?
They need to abandon fragmented individual charity work. They need to consolidate. The strategy requires them to gather together to form unified, highly specialized social welfare foundations.
Wait, but if they just team up and hire some staff, aren't they just creating, like, another giant bureaucratic charity? I mean, we already have thousands of those. How does forming a club of elite wives actually change the outcome on the ground?
Because of the sheer gravitational pull they generate.
Gravitational pull.
Yeah, think about it. When you consolidate the wives of the top 20 or 30 corporate titans into a single unified foundation, you are creating an unparalleled center of influence.
Oh, I see.
They aren't just pooling money, they're pooling the entire nation's attention. That level of unassailable funding and high-profile social shielding acts as a magnet. It attracts the absolute brightest minds.
Like the experts who actually know what to do.
Exactly. The top sociologists, researchers, PhDs, people who desperately want to solve societal issues but currently lack the resources or the platform to do it.
So they are essentially building an elite R&D lab for societal problems. They provide the capital, the visibility, the protective umbrella, while outsourcing the actual technical problem solving to the top-tier experts.
That is the fundamental architecture of it. They provide the leadership and the funding framework. The experts provide the technical mechanisms to enact real change.
Which brings us to the first massive test of this R&D lab. The foundation has all the money, all the experts, all the public attention. What is the inaugural project?
It's a heavy one.
Yeah, the source zeroes in on something incredibly heavy, the Zero Suicide Project.
Yeah.
Out of all the social issues a foundation could tackle, wealth inequality, environmental collapse, education gaps, why mandate that they start with something as dark and complex as suicide prevention?
Because it is the ultimate metric of societal failure. The text's rationale is deeply structural here. It points out that South Korea currently ranks #1 in suicides among developed nations.
Right.
And the argument is that suicide represents a foundational, terminal despair. If a society is driving its citizens to give up on life entirely, any other social program is basically irrelevant.
I mean, you can't offer job training or environmental protections to someone who has already decided to check out of existence. It's like trying to paint the walls of a house while the foundation is literally crumbling into a sinkhole.
Precisely. The text views it as the most urgent test of true social welfare. Unless this specific foundational despair is investigated and resolved at its root, the society can never be properly fixed.
So they have to find the root cause.
Right. The social parents and the recruited experts must map out exactly why this despair exists, whether it's hyper-competition, extreme economic isolation, a collapse of community support, and then engineer structural interventions to dismantle those causes.
And the vision doesn't stop at the South Korean border either. The blueprint laid out in this 2026 lecture sees this as the launchpad for a global movement. But, how do you export a social welfare model? South Korea has very specific cultural pressures. How does a Korean initiative become a worldwide blueprint?
It relies on South Korea acting as the global testing ground. The chaebol system provides a uniquely concentrated environment to prototype this.
Because the wealth is so centralized.
Exactly. Once the wives and daughters of South Korean leaders successfully model this social parent organization, and their foundations actually drive down the suicide rate through expert-led interventions, well, the proof of concept is established. South Korea effectively becomes the global headquarters for this specific type of high-level social engineering.
They basically build the instruction manual.
They do, and once the model works, they declare a World Zero Suicide Project. And what is fascinating about the source's observation here is its read on the psychology of the global elite.
Oh, right.
It notes that right now, the wives of global corporate leaders, whether they are in Silicon Valley, London, or Tokyo, they are desperately searching for a meaningful path.
Like they have immense wealth, but they feel isolated.
Highly scrutinized, isolated, and lacking a true societal purpose.
So they're trapped in their own version of the designer bag paradox. They want to be useful, but the existing avenues of just writing checks to museums or attending fancy galas, it just feels hollow.
Totally hollow. So when they witness this successful, highly respected, and intellectually rigorous blueprint coming out of South Korea, the text predicts they will naturally gravitate toward it.
It gives them the structure they need.
It provides the exact structure and profound meaning they are missing. They will adopt the social parent model in their own countries, reporting back to the headquarters framework established in Korea.
Okay, but let's look at the actual engine driving this. Because anyone listening to this with a background in business or logistics is probably mentally calculating the cost right now.
Oh, it's astronomically expensive.
Right. We are talking about massive, nation-scale social welfare, employing armies of top-tier PhDs, and eventually scaling it globally. Who is footing the bill? If a foundation is just a giant black hole for charity dollars, the corporate husbands are eventually going to turn off the tap. How does this system sustainably interact with corporate revenue?
This is where the model completely redesigns the current mechanics of corporate philanthropy. The text outlines how painfully inefficient the current system is.
How so?
Well, right now, corporate chairmen are often flying blind when it comes to social responsibility. They are donating tens, sometimes hundreds of billions of won a year to various fragmented charities. And mostly, it's just to manage public relations or hit tax targets.
So it's reactive rather than proactive.
Exactly.
They throw money at a problem after a public outcry, but they have no idea how that money is actually being deployed on the ground.
Because corporate leaders are experts at generating capital, not at sociological triage, they do not actually know how to execute social welfare. The money just kind of dissipates with no visible structural improvement to society, which is incredibly frustrating for the people writing the checks.
I can imagine. So how does the Social Parent Foundation fix the plumbing of that funding?
The foundation becomes the centralized R&D hub for the corporation's social conscience. Remember those top researchers we discussed?
Yeah, the ones who lacked resources.
Right. The source notes that right now, brilliant sociologists and welfare experts are scattered, underfunded, and lacking direction. The foundation recruits them, gives them a massive mandate like the Zero Suicide Project, and puts them to work.
And once that highly capable, expert-driven machine is running and actually proving its effectiveness, the corporations change how they donate. Instead of the chairman randomly deciding which charity gets a check this year, the corporation systemically routes a set percentage of its revenue directly into the foundation.
It creates a beautiful symbiotic loop. The corporations, and eventually even government bodies, entrust their core welfare initiatives entirely to the foundation.
That makes so much sense.
It takes the burden of figuring out social welfare off the desk of the corporate leader, who isn't equipped for it anyway, and places it into the hands of a highly specialized institute managed by the social parents.
It essentially transforms corporate giving from a chaotic, guilt-driven expense into this streamlined, highly efficient pipeline that funds actual expert-driven solutions.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it fundamentally alters the emotional reality of wealth.
What do you mean by emotional reality?
The ultimate goal highlighted in the text is that when social welfare is executed correctly, when it successfully addresses foundational issues like suicide rather than just applying superficial treatments, it ceases to be an obligation or struggle. It becomes a deeply fulfilling process.
Wow. It gives all that corporate wealth an actual, visible, and unassailable societal purpose. It's the ultimate systemic win, really.
It absolutely is.
The corporations get to see their profits actually healing the society they operate in. The public is supported by a robust safety net, orchestrated by true social parents. And the elite wives find a profound, demanding purpose that completely transcends the empty pursuit of status symbols.
It's a total paradigm shift.
So let's look at the incredible arc we've covered today. We started with the trap of the checklist marriage, where high status and multiple degrees completely fail to prepare the ultra-elite for the crushing psychological realities of their position.
Right.
We look at how idle wealth, the proverbial designer bag, acts as a political vulnerability that opposition forces use to destabilize the system. And we arrived at this highly structured, globally scalable solution.
Redefining the salmonym from a private consumer into a social parent.
Exactly. By forming unified foundations, acting as gravity wells for top researchers, and systematically routing corporate wealth to tackle foundational despair like the Zero Suicide Project, they could literally redesign the social fabric of a nation.
It really moves the definition of elite influence away from what you can accumulate and entirely toward what you can structurally heal.
The source argues that true influence for the elite isn't found in boardroom maneuvers, but in stepping up to become a social parent to the public that sustains them. But, it really makes you wonder, and this is what I want you to think about as you go about your day in our own lives, regardless of the size of our bank accounts or our job titles. Are we just managing our own small households? Are we just checking off our own little boxes of personal success? Or are we finding ways to scale our own skills to be social parents to our immediate communities? What would your personal Zero Suicide Project be like? What foundational despair could you help alleviate for the people right around you? Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us. We will catch you next time.